Last summer, I traveled to Niger, and that's where I met Halima, who's going to speak next. She was my guide in her home country. I wanted to go to Niger because I wanted to learn why women there still desire to have so many children, and still do. And as this idea of contraceptives is being introduced there, would the women welcome that idea, or would they really shun it? And as Halima and I went around in these villages in the desert, it was very hot, we came across a woman who invited us into her home, Sadie Sine. She already had 5 children. She was very vociferous about the fact that she wanted to use contraception and how difficult it was for her to get. That there was a health post very nearby. She could see it, we could see it from her house, and they wouldn't offer her contraception. She had to walk about 10 kilometers in the dust to go get contraceptives, and it often wasn't available. And she kept saying to Halima and I, don't you see that we're struggling here? I'm struggling to feed these children. And so I said to Halima afterwards, how is it in such a destitute situation? They were between crops in their country and people were starving. I said, how do you remain optimistic? And Halima said to me, I think if Sadie Sine can remain optimistic in her own family life, I think I deserve to too. So I think you'll enjoy hearing what Halima has to say today.
Whenever she talked, she sprinkled my face with the kola nut she always chewed in her toothless mouth. Still, I loved visiting Hajia Goma, my great-grandmother. Hajia Goma taught me that even at 100 years old, nearly blind and confined to your compound, you could still give. She also taught me that to understand the true essence of being, you have to give of what you hold dearest. So every now and then, I would ask myself, did I give lately of what I hold dearest? By her side, I sipped at a cup of wisdom. I learned many things, but of all that I've learned, there is one lesson that I carry with me everywhere I go. Never cease searching for ilimi. Ilimi is a Hausa concept that everyday people would refer to as education. But my great-grandmother explained it to me as the harmonious combination of knowledge, humility, and purpose. Now, in my perpetual search for ilimi, I found my passion to engage and to work with women in rural areas, but most importantly, to give these women the means to empower themselves and the opportunity to achieve their highest potential. Today, I would like to challenge you to think differently about the way we engage with communities in rural areas, and to account as we devise programs for what I've come to refer to as the Girls' Social Allies, network of people who live around that girl. So I grew up in Arlit, a small town in northern Niger, as a third of a family of 6 children. My mother, who never graduated from high school, did not joke with my studies, our studies. And she would often say, no dinner until you have recited your lessons. And when I thought that she was joking, she would tighten her face. Then I knew that she was serious. The only time I felt bitterness in her voice was when she talked about how much she wished she had continued her studies. My father was among the first from his village to go to university. He was the type of person who made you feel really bad about not trying hard enough. He would often say, I had to walk 4 hours, 3 minutes, and a few seconds to school, and I was never late. It was guided by hopes from my mother and stories of resilience from my father that at age 15, I became the first president of the youth parliament of my country. I became more acquainted with the realities of girls my age in rural areas. Now, that experience was also challenging. We faced threats from some of the voices that didn't really agree with some of the work that we did on girls. Yet, as we engage with communities, it became very clear to me that we have to be able to create unlikely alliances and bring on the same table, or shall I say on the same mat, people who might not necessarily sit together. Now, even people that might initially appear hostile need to be part of the discussion if we are to really create meaningful discourse in a community. As I became more acquainted with the challenges that faced girls my age, that only 4 out of 10 girls completed primary school and settled my world as a girl, I wondered why. I also asked myself, what can I do to make a difference? Oftentimes, shifts in personal aspiration starts just like that, with simple questions. Yet it was only 7 years later, as a consultant at UNICEF, that I truly understood how much the prosperity of my country depended on the faith of these girls. In 2004, I got a full scholarship to the United World College. My great-grandmother was not too happy. She had many questions. When are you going? Where is New Mexico again? Who would you stay with? In fact, I myself did not know where New Mexico was then. To many of her questions, I did not have a concrete answer. But when she asked, why so far away, I knew exactly why I was going. I told her, in search of Ilimi, and that single concept brought us together. I was 17 when I left home. My great-grandmother muted prayers, and in the process, she sprinkled my face with kola nut. She told me, come back. Never forget where you come from, and stay true to yourself. And when nobody else was watching, she whispered, don't forget to find a good husband soon. I was anxious. I wondered what subjects like chemistry would be like in English. My mother told me to be courageous and to hold on to my faith. My father only repeated what he often told me as I grew up. Be like the camel, but do not let anybody treat you like one. I would travel long distances and give other people the means to continue their own life journeys. Now, in my new school in New Mexico, the world opened up to me in ways I could never imagine, but not in the manner of Goma's stories, with a new appreciation for humans' ability to change and to bring about change. From my various community services, I learned that change often starts with an individual, and that it was my responsibility to contribute to making a new world. Yet, as I thought about girls my age, my peers in rural areas, I did not see a way out. Then, the road that could free my sisters, my peers, from what looked like an unending cycle remained elusive. Where and how do we start? Now, later at Wellesley College, I sought to find answers. I realized that challenges are no longer an excuse. Challenges are, in fact, an opportunity to look for alternatives. Now, along my journey, I was also pulled as a young African, and I encountered two groups of people, young Africans. One that reminded me of a cousin who once said that if he ever got a plane ticket to the US, he would use the return to buy his mother some gifts. He would never go back. Now, the other group reminded me of Nelson Mandela, who once said that, "I dream of the realization of the unity of Africa, whereby its leaders come together to solve the greatest problems of the continent." I chose the latter, and I joined a small group of students to build Harambee Alliance, then a small organization, today a worldwide alliance. I acquired lifelong skills, yet beyond any other skill, for the first time in my life, I came close to truly understand the meaning, the essence of that concept that my great-grandmother so often talked about, Ilimi. Ilimi, Sadia told me, is what she missed the most since her parents married her at age 14. I met Sadia as part of a research in one small village in southern Niger. Sadia is among the 2 in 3 Nigerian girls married by the age of 15. Now, often it's a girl deprived of opportunities and education that creates a woman in poverty. 2 out of 3 of Niger's poorest are women, mostly in rural areas. Now, it's true that my country has seen girls enter primary in numbers never seen before, but yet so few remain. It's also true that my country, as well as many other African countries, have grown. Yet growth alone is not prosperity. How can we possibly prosper when we ignore or overlook the faith of these girls, girls like Sadia? The road to development would be long, difficult, and perhaps impossible unless we adequately address the challenges that these girls in rural areas face. And this, to me, has become increasingly clear as I met with women like Freira. I remember when we started my conversation with Freira, she told me, "I hope you're not one of those foreigners who come in for 1 day and 2 and go back thinking they know enough about me and my context to come back with ready-made programs." I smiled nervously. Freira, when she was 14, was also destined to a life similar to Sadia's. Yet today, she is one of the few female directors of a primary school in her area. This to me was powerful. Why would a woman, a girl then from Garingaja, choose to be different? But most importantly, how did she succeed in an environment that preconditioned her to a different life? When I asked Freira what shifted the trajectory of her life from that of other women, she responded with an unshakable voice. "Halima, when rising grade after grade seemed like climbing an uphill mountain, somebody believed in me. My father," she said, "shielded me from negative comments. When my father told me that marriage could wait, he set me free to follow my dreams and achieve things that I never thought possible." Now, as I listened to Freira, I saw parts of my own struggles. Words resonate. They can transform. Words inspire. They can empower. Believing in people creates possibilities. And when there are possibilities, a woman who once shared her primary school desk with 3 other children in a classroom of 108 can dream, believe in herself, and make it to Harvard University. I stand today as the first woman from my country to enter the gates of this prestigious university. I hope not to be the last. Now, if words from trusted community members are so powerful, why do we overlook them as we devise programs for girls' empowerment? I strongly believe that if we find a concrete way to account for these intangible matters, then we would bridge a major gap in our interventions for girls' empowerment, especially in rural areas. My point here is that you cannot invest in the individual as if the individual were an isolated entity. You cannot also invest in the group and expect that to be enough for the girl. In fact, we need to be able to create around the girl a group of what I've come to refer to earlier, of social allies. Because as a girl attempts to break into something that has never been done before, she would need support. And this is more than just mentoring. During the 2 years that I spent in my home country at UNICEF, women like Fureira and girls like Sadia have opened up their homes to me. They invited me into their lives. This, to me, was an honor that allowed me to truly understand the challenges and opportunities that they face. And I must confess that I've seen many of my misconceptions and preconceived ideas crumble in the face of the resilience and extraordinary inventiveness of these women. So oftentimes in our minds, we have already created a narrative of what the life of a girl in rural areas might be. Well, we need to let these narratives crumble. We need to deconstruct these narratives, because when we deconstruct these narratives, we give voice to the girl herself. And when we give voice to the girl, real learning begins. When you remove yourself from the picture, then you start seeing things that may not initially seem important, but that prove to be very determining in the values of that community. Allow a community to be part of the process, and you get a completely different outcome. Changes in the lives of women in rural areas, in fact, cannot possibly happen unless we listen to these women. Listening to women in rural areas, not just as people who tell stories of their lives, but as women who define the way things get done. I believe Fureira is the type of women that we should be listening to as we devise and invest and implement programs in communities. When a woman like Fureira, who's preconditioned to a life of vulnerability, breaks away from a cycle, she has challenged a heavy past and recreated a new future. In fact, even girls like Sadia need to be listened to. I had a conversation with Sadia that I would take with me for a very long time. So I asked her what she hoped for the future. She said, "I wish I had a second chance. But truly, I do not hope much for myself at least. But I can assure you that my daughter would go to school, and she will remain in school much longer than I did." Now, despite the many challenges, I have never been more hopeful than that day, that indeed a new dawn would shine on our rural areas. When the Gates Foundation contacted me for this opportunity, I initially thought, this must be a mistake. And when I realized that this was serious, I created in my mind all sorts of interesting excuses that did not make much sense. However, despite my fears, I accepted to join you today. I accepted to join you today because I hope that girls who grew up in places that may not even appear on a world map would dream, believe in themselves, expand their realm of what is possible, and achieve. With me on this stage are people who believed in me, even when I doubted myself. People who joined me in celebration of unlikely successes. People like my father, who stood by my side. People like my mother, who returned to school at age 50 and bent social norms. People like my Quranic school teacher, who told me that success or anything of the sort does not have to come at the expense of things that I hold dear to my core. I dedicate this talk to you because you are, in many ways, my greatest social allies, people who gave meaning to the intangible matters in my life, people who, like my great-grandmother, sprinkled my life with beautiful sparkles of kola nut. Thank you.
That's beautiful. Halima, you talk so eloquently and so passionately about women's voices in Niger. And I love this idea of the social allies that surround a girl or a young woman. Mm-hmm. How do we get those voices heard more? And as people in the West are trying to design programs that might help these women and girls, how do we make sure that those voices are built into those programs?
I think as we devise programs, it's really important that we get to listen to the community from the very beginning. Because one of the big mistakes that we all make is that we come in at stage 2 or stage 3. But we need to be there at stage -1, in fact. And really making sure that even the problems that are brought forth at the table are problems and solutions that come from the communities themselves.
Your own story is such a powerful inspiration about what can happen, what a path and a journey can look like for a young woman from Niger or from any country. Tell us what you think is ahead for you next once you're finished with your MPA at Harvard.
So I have already been working on a few initiatives with women. I've helped a few women start their own businesses, and while not all of them have been successful, my hope is that after I graduate, I would work for a year or 2 abroad outside of my country to gain more experience. But ultimately, like I said earlier, I found my passion, and that is working with women and girls in rural areas, and that is exactly what I intend on doing upon graduation.
That's great. Well, thank you for answering our call and coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Halima.